I've heard that before about the experience report being quick, and then it wasn't quick. The last IETF was in Montreal, and I didn't take any photos in Montreal, so sorry. This is from my neighborhood. It's a Neener shot. Sorry, Neener. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the IETF, and for those of you who went to NANOG, there was a really nice overview of the IETF. Some of the management leadership, we call them, were here to talk about the IETF. This is a little bit more nitty-gritty, I think, but if you saw that, this all fits into that. These are working groups that are under the umbrella and the different areas that they talked about during their, I didn't watch the video yet, but I did read the abstract, and it seems like it all is related in a really good way. So this is from the last IETF, which was in July in Montreal. It's not meant to be in depth, but there's a lot of information. If you're interested in something, you should be able to take my bullet items and go look it up. And that's really, because I have 70 slides in, I don't know, 15 minutes or something, so good luck with that. Okay, so this RFC you probably aren't ever going to want to read, and you don't really care what it's about, but it's really important. So for the last, since IETF 1, RFC 1 was written in 1960 or something, the RFC format has been solely ASCII characters, dashes, dots, network diagrams made with pluses and minuses and dashes and slashes and asterisks instead of actually like a drawing tool. And this is the very first RFC that's published in the new RFC format, which is super exciting. And if you go look at it, you'll find there are no diagrams in it. But the header formats are all still in ASCII characters, which totally cracked me up. So anyway, but it's a big move for the IETF. It's kind of a big deal, and I thought we should at least mention it. So the IEPG is an operator forum that's been meeting at the IETF since the 90s, maybe, and most of the people at the IETF still don't know it exists, but we meet on the day before the IETF, and there are a lot of good discussions about operational things that are going on in the network and how perhaps we might fix them. So some of the things they talked about this time, this was a hack that happened they exploited a little kernel path in the Linux kernel to make a huge denial of service. So it's a pretty interesting read if you get a chance. This is another, this is about DNS time to live values and how longer ones benefit you in certain ways, like with denial of service attacks, because if your timers are longer, then you're less vulnerable to the denial of service attacks. The shorter ones are better if you're making operational changes, so it's a whole analysis of what you might set them at if you're setting up your DNS. Let's see. This is a way to know if things in the DNS have changed. Sometimes if a hack happens, the change happens and then unhappens before anybody even notices. So this is a way that they're looking at keeping track of the information and when it changes so that you could know that things were quickly changed and there was something bad going on. Sea turtle. So sea turtle is another exploit that happened to a bunch of in the Middle East and organizations in the Middle East and North Africa. And there's a paper at the link, I think, there, if you want to read about it. And I think this has, so it affected 40 different organizations in 13 countries, so it was pretty prolific. And they're somewhat worried that, maybe it'll start happening in this region and not just in the Middle East. So it's something to keep an eye on. So routing in 2018, I know it's 2019, but Jeff Houston talked about routing in 2018 because the routing table in 2019 looks indistinguishable from the routing table in 2018, which is kind of funny. It's growing at the same rate. The same number of ASNs are being added, exactly. even though we've run out of v4 address space, we're still adding the same number of prefixes. They're every month and every year, they're just smaller. So that's kind of strange. But anyway, if you get a chance to look up his talk, it's always really entertaining. I think he's here too. You could ask him questions. So the technical plenary, I saw Steve Bellevin in the hall, and it had been so long since I had seen him that I couldn't remember why I knew him. But anyway, it was kind of, you know, like you haven't seen somebody in a really long time, and then you're like, what? Anyway, they gave a really great talk about privacy and the internet, and whether notice and consent is the way it's always been, but there's no way to know who's gathering your information, and it's all encrypted. So, like, I have a smart thermostat in my house, and I learned from this that the newer versions of my smart thermostat now have a camera in them. Why does my thermostat need a camera? I don't know. So it's really a thought process of what we should be thinking about and how we should be changing things so that people's information get used in a way that they think is appropriate. So it's really good to check out. So the transport area is everything to do with the transport protocols on the network. And I try to go to some of these overview working groups when I don't have V6 stuff to go to, because they are kind of a survey of that whole area. And we've talked some about transport area in my talks in the past, because there's a movement underway to encrypt the transport layer, and that causes a lot of problems for a lot of enterprises and people who run networks, because you can no longer see what's going on in your network. So there's a number of things going on to try to, I'll talk about, to try to figure out what's going on when everything's encrypted. Let's see. Yeah, so this is a way to determine loss on an encrypted transport layer. So it's a draft that's going around, loss signaling. Like I said, this is like the helicopter view. So now we're on to security. The Security Area Directorate is also another one of these overarching groups of security in the IETF. So this is about Lisp, which is the locator it's a different way of doing routing, where you separate your location from your destination, and then you route accordingly. And there's ways to determine a lot of information about people using Lisp. So this is a discussion of, is it okay to not have location and movement privacy, or is there a way we could do Lisp and still have those sorts of privacies? It's amazing what they can tell about you just from what you do on the network. It's kind of crazy. And then this is about, do we need an expanded threat model? So historically, we've believed that the network may be compromised, but the end systems aren't compromised. And is that still really the way of the world with all the exploits that are going on? So they're looking for feedback on this draft. So if that interests you, I am sure that the working group would appreciate for you to take a look. So DNS Operations is a working group that's really all about the operations of the DNS and various DNS-y things like that. Let's see. So we talked about A-name before. A-name is like CNAME. It's just, it can exist with other record types that CNAME can't. And that's getting further along in the process. So if you're interested in that feedback, I think they're looking for feedback. Considerations if you're running a large authoritative DNS. Basically stuff about how to best configure your Anycast so that you have the most robust DNS infrastructure. Oh, yeah, so there are a couple of overarching issues on the internet these days. Fragmentation is bad. We've talked about that before. Packets are getting bigger and bigger because we have more header information and various things. And it's the same in the DNS. The DNS, the packets are getting bigger and bigger, and with V6, they're getting bigger and bigger, and there's a lot of problems. with packet size and fragmentation. So draft is talking about how to avoid fragmentation in the DNS. Let's see. Yeah, and then there's another draft that's trying to solve the CNAME, A-name thing, because we need multiple protocols for the same thing, which we'll talk a little bit about more in V6 Ops. Let's see. Yeah, so this is a way that you can know whether something that looks like a subdomain of a domain is actually valid, like, you know, foo.example.com is really part of example.com, or not somebody exploiting and spinning off a subdomain. And then there's a bulk format for easy sharing of the DNS zone information that they're proposing. Yeah, so this is I think Paul Vixie gave a talk at NANOG about DNS over HTTP. I wish I could have been there for that. Anyway, this is a BOF all about that sort of stuff, applications doing DNS on the internet. Let's see. Yeah, so they're writing a DNS over HTTP BCP. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but here in the super small print are the list of things that they're looking at putting in there, how to manage it, what enterprises can do, you know, setting up the servers and all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure that they would love having people with experience to write some of these sections, or maybe add some that they haven't thought of. So SIDR Operations is the secure interdomain routing. It used to be that we were working more on the protocol side. Now we're working more on how to operate it. And this is about the group. Yeah, so this is a way that somebody who's advertising an ASN that's advertising an ASN, you can know whether they're the valid announcer of it. So it's not just validating the prefix, but actually validating that the upstream that's advertising it is a valid upstream. So that's a draft about that. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to just skip through that. Yes, this is an extended community that carries more information about the validated state of a prefix. Let's see. Oh, and then this is a way that they're looking at to make the key role easier, so that you can say which keys are the valid keys to do the key role. There's a lot of work being done on the key role stuff and how often we do it and whether we do it or not and all that sort of thing. Okay, so V6 operations. So V6 maintenance I'll talk about later is about the actual protocol and maintaining the protocol, and this is all about operations and interaction between V4 and V6 and pathologies that are happening operationally in the network. This was an awesome talk. So this fellow manages a large wireless network on the African continent, and he's living the dream, as I like to say. So back in the NSFNet days, we had all these acceptable use policies, and we had to route all the traffic based on, like the US didn't let, Russian prefixes in, and the this and the that. So in the African continent, there's all these different countries, and they all have rules about, what traffic can go across them and how the routing has to work. And not only that, but on top of that, so we've talked before about if you have 5 different standards for a particular protocol, like a tunneling protocol, then you don't really have a standard, right? Because this gizmo could implement one, and this gizmo could implement another. And this poor guy, his customers all come with their own gear. And they all have v6 transition mechanisms that don't interoperate. They're all standard, but they don't interoperate. So this guy's house can't do the transition mechanism that he picked. Anyway, it was awesome to listen to him, and it was just so, it's really a lesson in, we really need to have singular standards for things and not a menu of standards, because he's just in this, like he doesn't know any given day if his, the new customer is going to be able to connect to his network, and whether he's going to be able to futz the traffic around so that, he pays attention to everybody's acceptable use policy in all these different countries. It's really quite an engineering feat. Anyway, I love it when they have real people come and talk about their networks, because it's pretty exciting. So I talked about all of that. So this is a v4, v6 translation. There's some pathologies where if you're v6 only, you still might do a translation even though the network is v6. Why not just do v6? And sometimes when you're v4 only, you end up translating twice because it takes a while for it to figure out what you're really doing. So there's a lot of work being done to try to eliminate those extra steps. So if I'm v6 only, I just use v6, and like my day, I go on with my day. And this is a documentation about that, a document about that. So this is another problem on the network where there's some expectations that a connection, a new connection, the connections on the network are bidirectional, and if a new neighbor comes up and it's not in your cache, you decide that you're not going to use the traffic. You're not going to accept it because it's not something that's already in your cache. And Jen has been doing a lot of work on these just really interesting problems with duplicate address detection and routing advertisements and stuff in v6 to try to sort all these things out. So there's a security considerations document for IPv6 that's being worked on since 2012, and it isn't finalized yet. But they're working on finalizing it and getting something out there, because we really do need to pay attention to these things. And then there's some ISIS work being done with, how do you design a network that's v4 and v6, dual stack, or maybe it's just v4 or just v6, and combining with ISIS. We talked about this draft before. This is sort of an overview of all the different prefixes that you might use to number your point-to-point links on your network. So, and why. Jordy's been working on this for a while. I think I've talked about it a few times at this talk. Let's see. Oh, and Jordy's been working on this too. This is, what is v6 only? So is it really that you're really only v6, or maybe you're still encapsulating v4? It's a definition of what v6 only means. And in this case, if you're still tunneling v4, but your native infrastructure is v6, then you're v6 only. Let's see. I'm not going to talk much about this, but they've started doing this technology deep dive thing. One of them was about routers, and this one was about network interface cards. It's not really my thing, but if you're really interested in network interface cards and how they're designed, have at it. It's awesome. So the Advanced Networking Research Workshop, so in the spring and then the summer, we have or I think it's in the spring, we have just the workshop where people come and present all these advanced researchy things they're doing. And in the fall, we get the presentations of the winners who have published papers that get accepted, and they get a prize for whatever their research is. And so these, it's in parallel with IETF, so I only end up going if I have some, spare time in my day, which seems strange. But anyway, so this is research that's being done on stateless address auto-configuration using software-defined networks. And I think it's a research paper, so if you wanted to read it, just Google it. there's always something at the IETF that shocks me, and this, pretty shocking. So there's a database at the IANA that has everybody's time zone in it. And like if when we change daylight savings time, they put it in some flat file and everybody uses that to like coordinate their time on the internet. Really? I don't know, it just surprised me. So for 26 years, it's changed 2,200 times. So it has all that like esoteric, like I'm a half an hour different than you kind of nonsense, and it's in a file at the IANA. I was shocked. Let's see. So this is about inferring things from the network. And when you have an encrypted transport layer, can you infer things about the network that you need to know without decrypting? So this is techniques to do that. Can you determine if there's an attack going on and if everything's encrypted? And remarkably, you actually can infer a lot about the network even though it's encrypted. Excuse me. Okay, so V6 maintenance is all about the IPv6 protocol itself and not so much the operational aspects of the protocol. So like I said before, we have this whole routing extension header thing, and the packets don't, like Jeff was saying in his talk, that 30% of the extension headers get dropped, but we keep adding them. And we have a segment, they're looking at doing segment routing with the header, and that draft is in I guess it's just got of last call. Let's see. Oh, and the ICMPv6 errors also have a lot of things for broken extension headers in them, and that's in that draft. So path MTU, so the maximum transmission unit in the network, you're supposed to be able to discover that. There's been a protocol forever that doesn't work. And so because we have all these problems with these big packets and fragmenting these big packets, there's a movement to try to figure out how we put that in the network and actually discover the MTU and make it work so that we don't have the fragmentation and we don't have the problems with the packets being dropped by firewalls and various things. And so this is a hop-by-hop option to share the MTU across the network. And like I said, Jeff says that 30% of the extension header packets fail, which is pretty high and kind of scary that we keep adding extension headers. But anyway, is that some sort of insanity thing? I don't know. So this is about neighbor discovery on wireless networks. There are some problems, and the duplicate address translation doesn't always work because it takes too long. Yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of address conflicts because the address space isn't ginormous, but it could be that you're all just using this one part of this huge prefix, which is probably what happens more than you think. So they're trying to fix some of these pathologies in the protocol so that it's not as chatty, it works better, and the success is better. Yeah, so this is the way, again, fragments are bad, packets are too big. It's the overarching theme. And this is a way to make fragmentation better. So if the header is really big, maybe we still want the first packet to include the entire header so that we don't have as much problem when we're trying to reassemble it. The other thing I'm just going to take a moment, a peeve of mine is that why is the MTU 1,500 bytes? Because somebody said so. But it's easily changeable. Why aren't we doing it? Anyway, my soapbox, I'm off of it now. Because almost all modern equipment will let you configure it across the network, and yet we don't. Let's see. Yeah, so this allows you to know what your NAT64 prefix is, and then they're moving this esoteric RFC to historic maybe of jumbograms, which are these ginormous packets that are optional anyway. So the argument was, who cares if it's historic or not, because they're ginormous and you don't have to use them. I don't know. So let's see. Yeah, so this is just some diagnostic tools for segment routing in IPv6, ping and trace route, and other tools. So I went to the network management research group because I could, and I had a lot of giggles. I'm sorry, I did, because intent-based networks is kind of the thing now. So for a while it was autonomic networks, but they all apparently run themselves. No need for us. They all run themselves. And they're based on your intent. And so I was just having a really good time thinking what I would intend my network to do, and then how this gizmo would make config commands out of that. I don't know. It just makes me giggle somehow. But if you're interested, there's a link. I could intend my network to do a lot of stuff, you guys. I think so. Anyway, wouldn't it be great, though? Anyway. Let's see. Yeah, and then you could classify your intents. Like maybe you're in a bad mood one day. I'm sorry. Anyway. But more seriously, like interface or, but a model of intent. I don't know. Just had a good time with it. And there's more intents. And I am really not sure the emperor has clothes, but nonetheless. I guess I didn't say that at the beginning. I often include things that I type randomly while I'm taking notes in these meetings, and that was one of them. I'm sorry. And there's a management framework for my intents, which is super cool. Okay, source packet routing is another working group that I went to. The charter is there. This was, I only include this because of the example in the draft, because this is not going to go anywhere because it's using a code point that isn't allowed in any other RFC. So, but they used a /32 per router loopback in IPv6, and that's like a whole ISP allocation because it was easy to subnet. But one of the women got up and said she thought briefly that they had mixed up v4 and v6, because in v4 a /32 is an address, and in v6 is like a ton of addresses. Anyway, it was pretty funny. Got to have some fun at the IETF. This is a way to carry some node and ring IDs around in DHCP that's being worked on, because otherwise there's not an easy way to assign them. Yeah, how to operate segment routing in IPv6. This is about that. More segment routing drafts for your perusal. Okay, so this, again, one of the things I went to that was just idle curiosity. So this is all about the requirements for the IETF network itself. And I think we all, in all of these meetings, have this sort of thing that we discuss. Do we really need the things we're paying for? Could we really actually just use the hotel network? Do we really need a lot of this stuff? I know I didn't need it when they turned off all the v4 in the working group I was in, and I could no longer use my computer. I'm just saying, didn't need that. But a couple of the things that are really cool about it, they have a box that they send out. I think it's on the next slide. They have a box that they send out. It's called the Scout, and they put it on the network, and it sends them back all kinds of info about the hotel network so that they can better design the network. And then it does all the stuff so the geolocation of the IETF block isn't in Singapore anymore. It's in Montreal and that sort of thing. But one of the hotels, when they sent the Scout out, one of the hotels had the access points in the elevators. So can you imagine that, right? All of a sudden, you have really good signal, then you have really bad signal, then you have really good signal, then you have really bad signal. And if the hotel was like 40 floors, it'd be really interesting. Anyway, they had to fix that because that wouldn't scale. So anyway, the IETF is really trying to figure out, like, now that they're a separate organization and they're in charge of their own budget and not just an activity of ISOC, they're really looking at, what are we paying for? What do we really need to be paying for? What do the people attending the meeting really need? And that sort of thing. But access points in the elevator, take a note of that. Awesome. So the last two working groups that I've included here, I did because we're meeting with NANOG and they have to do with routing protocols, so I thought it would be helpful. So IDR is the Inter-Domain Routing Group, which is basically all about BGP, every kind of BGP. So this is the update on the BGP link state. So BGP is a distance vector protocol, and they really wanted to have some link state functionality, but not be as chatty in a data center like as OSPF would be. So they're trying to do this hybrid that's BGP and link state. And they're looking for feedback of folks. There's working code that you can check out. So let's see. Again, more MTU stuff because the packets are too big and fragmenting is bad. But they're looking at BGP path MTU because I guess BGP packets are getting too big too. So sending around the MTU information in BGP. It's an overarching, issue. This is BGP doing VPN stuff for V6 enabled networks. So maybe you're not running MPLS, but you still want to have some MPLS functionality. It's just trying to put that into BGP. It's like everything either goes in DNS or BGP. Just add more stuff in there. Let's see. And then this is the next draft is a way for inter-domain to send colors back and forth, like different kinds of traffic so that different ISPs know, oh, this is that kind of traffic, I should treat it this way. So it's like a community thing. Okay, and then the other group I included because of NANOG is GROW. It's the Global Routing Operations Working Group. And sometimes the agenda is fairly full and sometimes it's not. So this is a community that gives you the ability to detect route leak and mitigate them. And then there's some monitoring of your RIB, a protocol to monitor your BGP RIB. And some other drafts, again, for your perusal. I think I might be, yeah. So if you're going to go to the IETF and you want somebody to hang out with or show you around, I'm usually there, at least till June. I'm renewed through June. And there's some good reading. There's a video about how not to be offended by the geeks that aren't real polite and various other things here. Like I said, if it's your first IETF, there's a great video. If you're a woman and it's your first IETF, we have a whole sisters group of women. We meet for lunch. It's awesome. And then, of course, the Net Girls. If you're interested in joining any of these, talk to me. Anyway, that would be, it looks like Mark has a question, maybe. And this is going to be me in another couple of weeks.
Yay. Okay, Mark.
Thanks. My vow of silence doesn't last that long, as it turns out. My name is Mark McFadden, Internet Policy Advisors. Three quick things.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I apologize for the first one. As a Milwaukee Brewers fan, I was very glad that we were able to arrange that Josh Hader would blow up and give the Nats the wild card game.
I can't hear
I
you.
know. So the second thing, and this is more directed to John and the board, is that I find these reports exceptional and really helpful. And even when I don't come, I still stream them. So it's feedback that you didn't ask for, but
It's very timely. One of the things that's come up frequently with the board discussion, this is a very well-rated session that we always have. And but the question is, we don't right now have a formal feedback mechanism for the community to decide which content you want other than policy discussions. And so we thought about a program committee, but then the other issue is we only have about 2 hours to 3 hours of slack in the whole agenda. So we're trying to figure out what's the mechanism for that feedback and how do we sort it. But I assure you, whenever we get that straightened out, we'll remind them that this IETF report is well rated. For Kathy, we actually formally anointed her the IETF reporter through the end of this year, and then recently we continued it through June. There's no intention to end the role, but the question is how often we go out and solicit, because maybe someone else wants to do it, or maybe she, there's some mental wear and tear doing this, I imagine, and she might want to share the load. So from that regard, we are going to continue the IETF report. We just don't know whether we'll solicit for a call for reporters and or how we compare this to other things that might go on the schedule. But I do appreciate it.
Okay, yeah, and just in the interest of giving you that informal feedback. The third thing is, and I'm so glad that you had one slide about the transport area, but one of the things that's very interesting and a trend that's going on, I think, in the IETF is that the research groups are getting more interesting. One of the things that I observed, and I'm going to give you an example of one of the research groups that I think has both identifier and operational interest. One of the things that's happening is we're starting to see research that talks about whether protocols really have their intended effect. So one of the things that we're doing right now is putting a lot of privacy, a lot of encryption into the network. But the question is, if you step back, is that actually doing what it's intended to do? Does that actually work? And there's a lot of really interesting research that's starting to show that if you take a step back and actually look at the implementations of the protocols that are relatively new, that have taken place since the Snowden revelations, that perhaps they don't actually do what we intended them to do. And it isn't really a question for Kathy, but one of the things I think the community should look at, if you're interested in such things, is that there is a group called the Privacy Enhancements and Assessments Research Group. There are 2 pieces of brilliant research that took place in Montreal that were presented there that have to do with obfuscating DNS queries, and that shows that things like DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTP perhaps don't do in the wild what they're intended to do.
Yeah.
So thanks for the report again. I think one of the things that's happening, a real trend here, is the research group is starting to do interesting work for the operationals and identifier community.
Cool. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Next speaker.
And there's Martin over there, too.
Hi, I'm Scott Johnson, SolarNet One. This may not seem directly related to ARIN or NANOG business, but due to the way that I've had to deploy my AS and route my packets, it's kind of critical to me. RFC 8221, cryptographic algorithm implementation requirements and user guidance, is dated October 2017, and this gives guidance for ESP and AH packets, encryption algorithm recommendations.
Right.
Is there any action in the work groups there to update these recommendations? Because this obsoletes Suite B, but it in itself is starting to become obsolete.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd have to look. I'm not off the top of my head. I don't think I've seen it being updated.
You should take that after the session and see if you can find out. I'm not aware of anything either. It would be in the 6-man group, but it's the IETF often has key documents expire because they're good enough, and so either someone doesn't bother to actually get them to RFC state, so the draft, the ID expires, or it's assumed it's been overtaken by something else, but it actually hasn't because the work that was in launch didn't get to a draft state, so we kind of end up with a gap. So it's worth looking at, and then if it turns out that there really is a draft that's expired that people are using.
But that's a RFC, right?
Right.
It's an RFC.
Is it an RFC or is it an ID?
RFC 8221.
Oh, it shouldn't expire then. Has
Well,
it been?
He's just asking if it's going to be updated.
Yeah, it was not expired. However, it was authored over 2 years ago. And we're talking about cryptographic algorithms, which is a quickly moving.
I see that.
Yeah.
Might have been overtaken by events. Okay, worth getting together. I haven't heard of anything going on in 6-band in that area either.
Thank you very much.
Far microphone?
Martin Levy, Cloudflare. This has kind of already been said, but this is a +1 on this report, both here and at other fora, because this is a brilliant meeting of information that exists within the IETF versus the operations versus the policy environment, and these do not overlap as much as people think, or in fact should. And this is a general call to anybody in the room. You should go to an IETF meeting if you haven't, because there's a lot more to learn than just a quick review like this. That's point number one. Point number two that you just mentioned, I wasn't going to say this, but yeah, some of the best stuff out there are in drafts that have expired,
Right, yeah.
including mine. And the third part is, just to let you know, Robert Metcalf is a professor here at the University of Texas in Austin, and so down the road is the answer to your 1,500 byte question.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, I believe I presented your draft on increasing the MTU through the exchange points at one point at a random IETF.
Yeah, so all good efforts go to, well, what?
Excellent. Front.
Owen DeLong, ARIN AC. Yes, this report is very useful, and we should keep it going, and I'm very thankful that Kathy does such a wonderful job year after year doing it. Going back to intent-based networking, I think that, you know, this might have potential if they can fully implement the DWIM interface. Do what I mean.
Yeah, well, not what I say, right?
Center rear mic.
Lee. It's been a long week. Lee Howard, IPv4 Global. My understanding about the 1,500 bytes, I actually made an effort to increase that also, and I was told, no, you have to go to IEEE to change those
And
sizes.
then they've said no.
And they've said no because, you know, somebody somewhere still has 10 megabit per second Ethernet.
Yeah.
Yep. Very hard to get rid of old things.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Any other questions for Kathy? All right. Thank you,
Thanks.
Kathy.